All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start us off with Nicole's video. Does that sound like a good plan, Diane and Susan? Okay, so I'm going to try to share the video from my machine, so please bear with me. And forgive me, I should give a bit of, I think Nicole will introduce herself, but she is from the Museums Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, which is why she can't make it in person today because it's like 3 in the morning where she is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Kearney and I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, where I manage the Australian branch of the BHL. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I work, the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors, Susan and Diane, who've added so much article data to BHL, and together with Joel and Mike have developed the workflows, tools and documentation that will make it really easy for anyone to do this incredibly important work. Susan and Diane are going to walk you through those workflows and tools today, and I'm really excited to be introducing this training session to explain why articles or segments are so important. There are almost 60 million pages of content on BHL, all of which are openly accessible, but accessible does not equal discoverable. BHL has some really clever internal search functionality that allows users to find this information. Its taxonomic name recognition tools make BHL an invaluable resource for researchers. And full text search allows you to search the text across every page of BHL. It relies on the OCR, which isn't always perfect, but it does allow you to search for common names, scientific names, and the names of people and places. However, BHL's full text search and taxonomic name recognition only work from within the BHL website. And if we want the content on BHL to be truly discoverable, we need it to be discoverable via the tools most people use to find stuff online, and that's external search engines. I would argue that if external search engines can't find our content, we might as well have left it collecting dust on a shelf. The only content on BHL that's discoverable from outside the BHL website is what's in the BHL catalogue. Most of what's in that catalogue is the metadata that's been uploaded into BHL via Core. The item level metadata and the title level metadata for the title each item belongs to. The primary bibliographic unit in BHL is the item, and the structural hierarchy on BHL is pages within items within titles. I'm sure you're all intimately familiar with what a title landing page looks like on BHL. The metadata for the title appears in the center here, and the metadata for each item appears down the right-hand side. The title level metadata is searchable from outside of BHL, which is really great if you're searching for a journal title, but it provides no information about the contents of each volume. The bibliographic unit of most interest to academics is the article. Most academic work is published in academic journal articles, and thus most citations in journal articles are other articles. Article data includes specific publication dates, authors, and article titles. Article titles are particularly useful because they include subject-specific information, such as common names, scientific names, place names, details of anatomy, and even the names of eminent collectors and organisations. Adding article data to BHL makes the biological knowledge locked up in the millions of pages of historic journal articles discoverable both within and outside BHL. And when you add article data to BHL, 4 important things happen. The first is that BHL automatically creates an article landing page complete with all that lovely metadata and a link that takes users directly to the first page of the article. The second is that all that data becomes part of the BHL catalogue, which means it's discoverable both when you search within BHL and when you search via external search engines. The third thing that happens when you add article data to BHL is that a new View Parts link will appear for each volume, allowing users to view every part in every volume. Clicking on View Parts will take you to a list of the parts that have been defined for that volume. For here, you have the option of clicking on View Metadata, which will take you to the landing page for that article, or you can click on the title of the article, which will take you to the page in the volume on which the article starts. And the fourth thing that happens when you add article data to BHL is that BHL automatically generates a table of contents within the book viewer, allowing users to see clearly the articles that we've defined in each volume. And clicking on those articles that they find interesting will take them directly again to the first page of those articles. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Diane and Susan, who will explain how to make all of this magic happen.
Wonderful. Okay, I hope everybody had a chance to see that video, and it should also be available in the recording in case you had any technical issues. I will go ahead and turn it over to Diane to take us through the next portion. Sorry, real quick though, if anybody has any questions or concerns while this session is in progress, please feel free to speak up or post your question in the chat, and I will monitor that. Thanks.
Thanks, Bianca. I'm actually going to kick it to Susan to talk about choosing a title.
Okay. So I think that many of you will have in-house publications from your institution, and you'll be very motivated to work on those in-house publications. But in case you don't have an in-house publication and you're interested in some journals that the Persistent Identifier Working Group has identified as important journals that would benefit from pagination, article definition, what we've done, and this was done very recently, is we created a repo in GitHub. And normally GitHub is used for software development, but it can also be used as a public ticketing system. So this is open to anyone, both within BHL and outside of BHL. And a link will be provided in the email that Bianca sends out following the training. But we've just started identifying journals that we think are good candidates. And you may be interested in selecting one of these titles for your own work. But the other thing we'd love for you to do is to add to this list. If you know of journals that would benefit from article definition, please capture that information here. And I also wanted to say a little bit about accounts. Most of the work that Diane is going to demonstrate requires an account in the BHL admin dash. So we have both the beta system and the production system, and you will need accounts on those systems if you don't already have it. And this is discussed in detail in the written documentation. I'd like to hand it back to Diane now.
Thanks, Susan. I am going to share my screen. I'm going to be doing a live demo, so everybody cross your fingers. And here we go. So this is the documentation Susan mentioned. Susan, Diana Duncan, and Joel Richard were instrumental in putting this together. It's extremely detailed, so you don't need to take 1,000 notes today. It's got some introductory material about segment metadata. The two sections I'm going to talk about today are creating segments in the admin dash and creating segments using the import segments function. Both of those sections have a little quick start menu, which is just a one-page reminder, as well as detailed step-by-step information, including screenshots. There's some advanced topics that we'll hold off for another session on. So the journal we're going to look at today is the Memoirs of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And Nicole mentioned this view parts, which means that this particular volume already has at least some identified parts. And that's the first thing you need to do is before you get started on a title is to figure out if there are already any identified articles so that you don't duplicate that. And there's a handy tool in the dashboard. So if you go to titles in the admin dashboard, select your title ID, hit search and go all the way down to the bottom. There's this little button called download segments. You push that and you're going to get a TSV file that you can open up and you'll see what already has segments. In this case, I'll pop it over here. This is what the file will look like. This is the work we actually did Monday in the training to define segments. So you'll see that there are 3 already defined. So you can skip over those and start with the new ones. So that's the first thing you need to do. If the item is not paginated, but does have page numbers, you're going to want to paginate it ahead of time. It's going to make your life quite a bit easier. So this particular one has title, author, and page number, and you can see it's been paginated already. If there are no page numbers on the item, obviously you can't paginate it, but it certainly is easier if there are page numbers to do that. The other thing you may want to do is look for existing data to see if there is some information that you can get to help you with the metadata, so you're not recreating the wheel. Sometimes you can use APIs for things like JSTOR to get metadata if this journal's already there, or other databases. You may be able to do bibliography, some web scraping. Another handy thing is a table of contents. And the other helpful thing about a table of contents is it'll give you an indication of the end pages for an article, so you don't have to scroll through every page to try and figure out the start and end page. This particular journal is what we consider, I guess, a well-behaved journal. The articles are contained in contiguous pages. You may find that there are articles where for instance, the plates have been bound in the back, so the plates are separated from the article. And we'll show you how to deal with those particular instances when it's not contiguous. And if you're going to do the batch import through the import segment function, you'll also need a template, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and walk through adding an article in here, and we are going to add the third, I believe it's the 4th article. I've already pulled some metadata together, so let me go back to page. So we'll start at page 119 here. This is the first article that has not been assigned, and you can always check that table of contents and see that the first 3 ones were there. So if you go back to the admin dash and do segments, add a new segment. The first thing you need to do is select the item, and you can do either by title or by item number. So I'm just going to grab that item number here. And select the item. If there's an existing DOI already, for instance, if somebody like Bio1 or something had assigned it a DOI, you can put that in to the DOI field. The status is new. The contributor will be the person or the organization that is contributing the metadata for the article, not necessarily the one that did the scan. And you can have up to 2 contributors. So if there's some skeletal metadata in there and you add some more, you can put yourself down as a second contributor. Type, there are a number of different types of segments that can be added, such as correspondence or proceedings. Today, we're just doing articles in a journal. Add the title to this. You should take a look at diacritics and just double check that. If you can see the diacritics here in the web admin, that means it's going to go in fine into BHL. BHL expects a UTF-8 encoding for that. So if you're copying and pasting from somewhere else, you just may want to double check that. The sort title will be automatically generated. That will remove articles and punctuations. So you can skip over that and it will work. The page range refers to the numbered pages, what you would use if you were going to cite that article. So this particular one, the page number that is printed on the item is 119. So in the page range, we would put 119 to, and I happened to check this beforehand, and it ends at page 122. So you put a dash and 122. And I will mention one thing that's kind of helpful for some of these journals is on alternate pages, either the odds or the evens. At the top of the page, you'll see the author's name and some derivation of the title of the article. So you can kind of scroll down and keep your eyes open for that to look for the end of the article. And here's page 122 where it ends, and then there starts the new article. So you separate out these page numbers again for the start and the end page. There are cases where you have those plates at the end, or you might have discontiguous sections. Don't worry about that now. We'll catch those pages at the end. Right now, you're just going to define it with the numbered pages as if you were citing it. And then you need the Start BHL page ID. So that is this unique identifier down here that I'm going to grab for your start page. And that will go into that field. If we come down here to publication details, that will be the item information and the title information from the particular journal you're working on. You'll need to enter the volume, series, issue, and date for that particular item that you're working on. And now we can add authors for this article. And now if an author doesn't exist in the BHL web admin, you will have to add the author at this point. So it's sometimes helpful to have an additional tab open. So in this particular case, we're looking for George P. Burns. So you click add an author. You can search by author ID, or you can search by name. And we actually have two George P. Burns. And in this case, you could go to another window in the web admin and look at merging the authors if you need to. I had picked one of them already. I had checked that. So we're going to use this Burns George P. Who's the author of this article. If you have multiple authors, you should add them in the order that they appear in the actual article itself. And then we're going to select the pages of the articles. So you'll go to add page. We'll scroll down to 119. and say 119, we'll click that end page. There's this lovely select between button that will, so you don't have to click them all. You say done, and you'll see your pages. So that gets you the basic definition of the article. An important thing to do is hit save. If you don't, you're going to lose it. So here is our segment ID number now. And I usually just take a quick look over this to make sure if there's diacritics, they came through okay, and that everything looks okay. So that's how to do basic segments one at a time through the web admin. But obviously, if you're doing a whole journal or a bunch of things, you don't want to do this one at a time. So let's move on to batch uploading in a minute. But first, I want to stop and see if there's any questions about the individual segment uploading. And feel free to just jump in with questions, or you can throw them in the chat. I think Susan and Bianca are monitoring the chat.
Nothing in the chat so far.
Okay. Well, then I'll go ahead and move on to batch uploading. So you go to the web admin, to the dashboard, and click on import segments. And this is where you get your template. You can either get a text template or an Excel template. And the results you're going to get will look like this. It'll have a title, item ID, volume issues, a lot of the same fields that we just saw in the individual import function. And I went ahead and filled this out for 3 more of the articles that are in this particular item. Few things to keep in mind. If you can change these column headings if it's easier for you to work on with different names and map it later on. So you can do that. If you have multiple entries in some columns, like you'll see here for authors, there's actually 2 entries. You'll need to separate those with the delimiter. The default is a semicolon with no spaces on either side. And that will tell the system that it's going to have multiple entries on it. So I'll just kind of walk through some of these columns here for you. The title obviously is what's on the item as it was before, the item ID, the volume, issue, series, and date. If you're using Excel, word of warning about the date. If you get into month and day structures, Excel does have a habit of reformatting dates. So you want to check that carefully when you upload it. Authors, you can put them in by name, and then when we import, you'll be able to map them to authors already in BHL. If there's no author in BHL, this will automatically create one, unlike the single entry where there had to be an author for you to choose from. Here it will create one if there's not an author already there. You can use BHL author IDs for the authors, or you can use alphabetic characters for their name. You can use a mix of both. And that's why I chose an article towards the end of this particular journal issue to show you the ability to do that. Start and end pages if you've got the item paginated, and here's where paginating the item comes in handy, because if it's a simple journal like this one where every page number is unique and not repeated, you can, oops, get back here. you can put the start and end pages, and you don't have to put BHL page IDs in. So I'll show you how that works with this second and third article example. If it's not that way, so if you have a journal, say like this, which each issue you can see starts repaginating, so we have multiple page ones, you're going to have to put in BHL page IDs. And you'll put the start BHL page ID just like we did on the single entry form, but you'll need to define an end one because there'll be no menu for you to select the pages. Everything between the start and the end page will be included in that segment definition. But let's say you have one where the plates are in the back. In that case, what you would do is use this additional page ID column to identify those non-contiguous pages, and you would separate them with a semicolon and just list them out. Unfortunately, you can't do a range. So if there's 12 plates at the end, you're going to have to list all 12 of those BHL page IDs in order to get the system to take it in. I will mention too that each spreadsheet that you upload must be of a single segment type. So if you have a mixture of, say, proceedings and articles, you're going to need to separate those into 2 separate sheets. So that is our basic spreadsheet. Here I put the contributor down here as well that we're going to upload. And I'll stop here and ask any question if there's any questions about the spreadsheet, and if not, I'll go into the import function and we'll bring this data in.
No chat questions so far.
Okay.
Oh,
all right.
Here we
So
hold
we
on.
start.
Hold
Yep,
on. We've
go
got
ahead.
one.
Go ahead.
We've got one. All right. Jackie's asking for creators that are not already in BHL, is there a way to associate the new to BHL author name with an identifier like an Orcid or FID at the point of upload? Or do you still need to go in and do that later?
You'll still need to go into the author to the author through the web admin and add that into the regular author interface.
Then just to follow up from my end, it seems like because we're adding author creators, which would not typically be part of BHL's data set, that might be a more frequent occurrence for folks to add author names and the IDs. Okay.
Okay. We will, do we have another question?
Not in the chat, no.
Okay. All right. So we've got our spreadsheet. So we'll start the import. It's an article. I happen to have an Excel spreadsheet. Let me find the file. So I've chosen my file, hit next, and here's where it's going to map the column headings that you have in your spreadsheet to the actual field names in the BHL database. So you'll notice things like in the spreadsheet, I called the column date, and it's actually year in the BHL database. Start page is actually article start page in the database. So if you see some of these and they're blank, you can drop down and choose what it should actually map to. The third column will identify the delimiters. So in this case, these are the fields that can have multiple values. Author names, additional page IDs, and contributors can all have multiple entries. If for some reason you used a different delimiter, you can define that here and change that column. So once you've reviewed this and made sure that your column titles match up to the fields that you want to import into BHL, you hit next, and it will give you a preview of the first handful of entries that you have in that spreadsheet. So you can look and say, yes, that's the article title, the item ID, and just give this a double check to make sure that things look okay in that mapping. Once you're happy with the mapping, you click next, and it'll take a second to import the data. Now it's not in BHL yet. This is yet another opportunity for you to check and make sure that what you have is correct and to map those authors. So if you click on the plus sign, it'll expand the metadata that you've entered here. And we can look at this first one and see the title and the right journal, the start and end pages. Status okay means BHL did checks on the validity of the information and said, yes, this is a year, and, yes, these pages exist in this particular item, and things like that. If you get an error message, you can always go back and fix that on your spreadsheet. Now, this particular one, I had just put Cook as the author, and BHL looked and found a Melville Cook and linked to that BHL ID. I can select and see the author, and in fact, Cook Mel T is a unpreferred variation of the name. So I know that this is in fact the author I'm looking for. And if there is a single value, BHL will map this author for you. And then I can see the pages and I can see the page IDs. So we'll look at that second one, and this one you'll see BHL couldn't find a match for this one. So we'll click on link and we'll look at Dodge, and I'll shorten that up a little bit. And we'll see if we can find, and we have a BO Dodge. This one happens to be without periods, but that is the one that I will pick to link. It'll tell you which one you've selected. And if you apply, now it has linked that author. And if you don't do this step, what BHL will do is create Dodge, B period, O period as a new author when you import these segments. So it's worth the time to try and link these together. And the final one you saw, I did the ID, the BHL author ID as one of the authors, and you'll see that matched up just fine. And the second one didn't match, and let's see what we can find with a Harvey. And I tend to shorten these up just a little bit to try and give a good range of values for this. You can see there's a Harvey RB. There's also a couple of different Harveys. So this may take a little bit of research. And I don't think I determined, no, I did not determine which one it is. So I'm going to select, just in the interest of time here, select the Harvey RB and go back and check this after the session. But if I were doing this in more real time, I would also look maybe at these Rodney Beechers and see if these authors could be merged or not. So that's on my to-do list to go back afterwards. But it is something that you can do just in another window, because you can always go to an author and see their titles and their segments and any identifiers that are associated with them. So I could try and get some more information and determine whether those needed to be merged. So I've looked at this. You can always, yeah.
Sorry, Diane. So if I'm merging authors in a different window and I go back to this segment screen and refresh, it's not necessarily going to update in real time, is it?
I believe it will.
Oh, okay.
I can't say that for sure, but I believe it will, because I often work with a second screen.
So let's say you did reconcile the Harvey RB. If you went back to this and you clicked on link.
I believe it. Yeah, I think it will. If not, you might have to refresh.
Okay. And then if you refresh, you're not losing everything you've already done?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, I will mention here that if you want to check that start page, you can click on this icon and it will show you the start page of the article. With that. So there are my 3 articles. And at this point, I'm happy with the metadata. I know I got to go back and look at the Harvey, but otherwise I'm happy with the metadata. So I will click import records and we will have the magic happen. And now I will see this is the training spreadsheet 1 that we imported today. You'll see there were 3 records there and 3 of them were imported. If things are rejected, which you can reject items or the system may reject items, you'll see that in this column or denoting errors with that. If you ever want to go back to segments that you put in and see what you had, you can go back to this data import and see this segment import history, which will bring up the same screen. And that will bring up the metadata and the status. So if for some reason you didn't, you missed one and that got rejected or something, you can see what it is and you can see all the metadata that was in there. So that's the basics of importing in bulk, and you can certainly see how if you had a lot of repetitive information, or you could go through a whole journal and do these spreadsheets and bring them in mass. I also tend to find that if I have a journal like these botanical museum leaflets that is a publication from my institution that has the same authors multiple times, I tend to keep a cheat sheet of the author ID just to make sure that it maps well. So are there questions? I'm happy to answer questions about this or the individual import.
Yeah, there was a chat discussion about workflow for creating segments versus creating authors first and the recommendations to do that. And so I'd like to turn it over to Susan, if you don't mind addressing your recommendation for the workflow.
I think this is personal and others may have a preferred workflow that differs from mine, but my preferred workflow is to put new creators into BHL up front, to do that at the very beginning, and at the same time I add the creator to BHL, I put in all of the identifiers that I can find and the identifiers that the cataloging group recommends now, if they're available, are Orcid, Wikidata, and VIA. So at the time I add a creator record to BHL, I add those identifiers if they're available. I save the creator record, and after those new creator records are saved and I have the creator ID, that value can just be plugged into the author column. So that's my preferred workflow, but I think Diane may do something different.
Yeah, I do tend to try and gather some, if there's a table of contents, to look at the authors ahead of time and merge and map and things, because I'd rather go through this either process in one shot without having to worry about stopping and dealing with adding an author or checking an author or something like that. So I tend to do that ahead of time as well if there's a table of contents. If there's not a table of contents and I'm doing the bulk uploading, I may go ahead and go through this process. And if there's not that many that I don't recognize or I can't look up really quickly. So I do tend to go with Susan if I can to look at the authors ahead of time. It just makes an easier mapping if you have the ID.
I'm fairly certain that we have some author reconciliation or adding author documentation, but I'm not sure what state that's in exactly, if it's fully complete or if it still needs tweaking. Is anybody from the cataloging group able to speak to that?
Sorry, I just ran off for a minute. What was the question?
Sorry, Diana. I was just curious about the status of our author creation documentation and whether or not we might need to tweak that, or
we need to tweak that.
Okay. All right. And Diane, do you mind scrolling up just to show people where they could access documentation in the admin dash?
Oh, okay. I actually don't know where to do it. So
no worries, no worries. All the way at the top right of your screen, that help button there, if you click on that, you will have access to all of BHL's documentation. And so, you know, as Diana noted, a lot of our documentation was created back in the beginning of our program and is continually being tweaked as we update our systems. So take a look at it, but you know, just please be aware that these are living documents. So if you need any tips or tricks, or if something seems out of date, please give me a heads up and I will pass it on to the appropriate people.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't point out, if you remember on the last two, we just put the start and end page numbers, and you can see that BHL, because those were unique start and end page numbers, was able to pick out the BHL page IDs. So that's a big labor saver. You're not cutting and pasting BHL page IDs if you've paginated the item ahead of time. Okay, Bianca, did Nicole do that other recording? I think we have time to do that. Unless were there more questions about the basics of doing a segment?
Leave a moment for folks to consider questions. I don't see any in the chat, but yes, I do have another video. right, it sounds like there's no questions
Top
for
share.
now. So I'll go ahead and share Nicole Kearney's second video. So just a moment, please. And again, if anyone has any technical issues, please speak up with regard to the video, audio, and picture. I'm going to hit play now.
Hi everyone. I'm now going to talk about why DOIs are so important. DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier. A DOI is a unique, permanent, and persistent identifier which carries all of the metadata for the piece of digital content it's assigned to. So for our journal articles, once we've collected all that bibliographic article data, the final step is to give each article a DOI. DOIs are displayed in the form of a clickable link that should be used by anyone citing a piece of literature. Modern journal articles are assigned a DOI at the point of publication, and they're used wherever the publication is cited or mentioned. This piece of research popped up in my Twitter feed. It's the announcement of the discovery of a new species of seahorse. There's the DOI. If I click on that DOI, it takes me directly to the primary literature. And if I want to know more about pygmy seahorses, I scroll down to the reference list, and there are more DOIs. Modern publishers have to include DOIs wherever they exist, and they're super useful. I can click on all those other DOIs and read all those other papers without leaving my desk. But there are DOIs missing in that list. The old papers don't have DOIs, and that keeps me awake at night, because now that it's so easy to find and read the recent published articles, researchers are much more likely to read and cite the new stuff. The historic literature is in danger of falling into obscurity. The modern linked network of scholarly research not only links articles to articles, it also links them to authors, taxon names, specimens, locations, etc. The vast majority of historic literature lacks DOIs, and it sits outside this linked network of scholarly research. If we want the content on BHL to be truly discoverable and persistently citable, it needs DOIs. So in 2020, BHL launched a global working group to retrospectively assign persistent identifiers to the historic literature on BHL. Team RetroPids, as we call ourselves, brings together the knowledge and expertise of librarians, programmers, metadata specialists, persistent identifier experts, and BHL super users. Our primary aim is to bring the historic literature on BHL into the modern linked network of scholarly research, specifically to assign DOIs to articles that don't yet have them, which is the majority of the historic literature, and to add external existing DOIs to the article data on BHL, particularly for articles that are behind paywalls elsewhere. And I'll explain how this works in a few minutes. In our first year, the Persistent Identifier Working Group added article data to over 16,000 articles and retrospectively assigned DOIs to over 10,000 articles, thus bringing this historic literature into that linked network of scholarly research. This is one of the most significant articles that I've worked on. It's the very first published scientific description of the platypus from 1799 and contains the first published illustration of the species. Now that this article has a DOI, it is so much easier to find, cite, link, share, and track this piece of content. This website's called Altmetric. It allows us to track citations and mentions of DOIs. And this page for the platypus article tells us that the platypus's new retrospectively assigned DOI has been mentioned in 331 tweets, 7 Wikipedia pages, a blog post, a news story, and 3 academic papers. And the only reason that we know this is that we assigned a DOI to this article. I've been actively tracking the performance of this new DOI, and I get notified of its research output. I was super chuffed when it was cited in an academic paper last year using its new DOI. But I was blown away when I was notified this year that it had been cited in a publication from 1999 and another from 1995, over 20 years before we'd minted our DOI for it. It turns out that the publishers of these 1990s articles, Oxford Academic and Elsevier, had rerun their citation indexing, which resulted in our retrospectively assigned DOIs being retrospectively linked to these old citations. This totally made my year and sent me down a rabbit hole looking for other examples of this. BHL has been assigning DOIs to titles since 2012. This is one of the first titles on BHL to receive a BHL DOI, Audubon's Birds of America. The earliest citation of this publication picked up by DOI tracking was in 1858. The definitive version of that 1858 article, the one with the DOI, is this one. It's not on BHL, it's on SpringerLink. They have put the DOI version of this out of copyright article behind a paywall. You can buy a PDF for €35, or you can click on that green unlock symbol, which tells you that Unpaywall has found an open access version of this article elsewhere. Clicking on that button will take you here to BHL. Unpaywall was able to find BHL's open access version of this article because we had added the external DOI to our metadata. Wherever DOIs already exist, we add them to our article data on BHL. This is crucial to discoverability of these open access versions. Those of you who haven't heard of Unpaywall, it's a massive database of over 30 million free scholarly articles, and it has an extension that enables users to click from paywalled articles to legally open access versions. That was that green unlock symbol I was clicking on in those previous slides. Unpaywall is an essential tool for accessing open access biodiversity content, such as the content on BHL. This is another significant piece of biodiversity literature behind a paywall. It's the first published description of the leadbeater's possum from 1867. Again, clicking on that green unlock symbol will take you through to our open access version, because we've provided that critical DOI in our metadata on BHL. The leadbeater's possum is close to my heart because it's the faunal emblem for my home state of Victoria. It's also critically endangered, which means that open access to information about its past distribution and abundance is critical to conservation efforts. We've now added over 62,000 external DOIs to the article data on BHL, making our open access versions of these articles discoverable. If you want to know more about how Unpaywall works, particularly in relation to the content on BHL, Rod Page and I wrote a BHL blog post about this in 2019. And if you want to know more about the work of the Persistent Identifier Working Group, there's also a BHL blog post about that. If you have any questions about adding article data to BHL, or about DOIs, or about the Persistent Identifier Working Group, please get in touch with Susan, Diane, or myself. And thank you again for taking part in this training.